Hey folks, and welcome to Typology, the show in which we explore the mystery of the human personality through the lens of the Enneagram. I'm Anthony Skinner, producer of the show, and we're happy that you're here today. We've got a great guest. Before I get to that, I want to remind you to join Ian and myself for the first ever live recording of Typology at the Balboa Theater in San Diego on March 21st. It's going to be a really fun night. We're going to have some really great guests. Tickets are on sale now, and you can go to typologypodcast.com and grab those. There's also an opportunity for some VIP meet and greet there, so make sure you check that out. We're happy to have you here. We have today with us Jill Phillips. She's a singer, songwriter, and therapist based here in Nashville. She's been immersed in the Enneagram for some time now, so she really has a lot of wisdom around the subject. She is an Enneagram Six. We're super excited to have a Six on the show. I passed this interview along to my son, who is a Six, last week, and he just told me last night how much it meant to him, so I know you're going to enjoy this. Hey, that's it for me, Anthony Skinner. And now, here is the host of our show, Ian Cron.
Jill Phillips, welcome back to Typology.
Thanks, Ian. So glad to be with you.
Man, the last time you were on the show was a few years ago.
I think that's right.
And you are an Enneagram Six.
Yes.
The loyalist or devil's advocate. Some say the trooper, although I hate that one as a signifier. And I know that from the time that you were here last to now, you have done a lot of Enneagram work.
I have.
You have done a ton of Enneagram work. So I am so excited to hear about what you've learned and how the Enneagram has influenced your life in the intervening years. I mean, it's like fantastic. So tell me, first, I want you to tell me what, from your perspective, Six is, right? What it's like to be a Six. And then what you've learned about the Enneagram in the intervening years that's been surprising or helpful or,
Sure.
wonderful.
What it's like to be a Six. I can go like micro for a second. When you asked me that question, I went to how can I represent all Sixes in a way that would be for the common good? That's what it's like to be a Six. I can't think about it just like as myself. That's the rub. I think it is. I think it's complicated. I think it's a complicated place to be. A lot more complicated than people think when they hear Six. It comes off very one-dimensional.
Right.
So in some ways, I've related to a lot of the teachings about a Four and why I probably even mistyped myself as a Two or a Four for a long time. It's because I resonated with how complicated it was to be a Six. How complicated it was to... that push and pull of really wanting to be with people and then going back in my that was too much. Okay, now I'm back out being with people. Then, now I'm back. That was too much.
Do you think that's the counterphobic continuum? Is that part of that or?
I don't know. I think it's a, things just cost me a lot. Being out there costs me a lot and yet I want it. But I think when you have to show up to everything dealing with sort of a low level of fear and anxiety, it just takes a lot of energy.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
Does that sort of make sense?
Oh, yeah, totally.
So I think in some ways I relate to some of what I've been learning about Fours carrying this sadness and kind of having the shaping that does of their hearts. I think fear can do the same thing to Sixes.
Okay.
I feel like it makes me a very empathetic person. Because I know I'm not unaware of what just living life costs, if that makes sense. So it's a complicated place, but I think what I'm growing in is I really like it. When I first heard about being a Six, I did not want to be a Six.
Yeah. Sixes tell me that all the time. I had a Six tell me recently, it's so khaki. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's so beige. It just doesn't seem to have, like, fours are kind of special and interesting and all these, but as a 6, and then they get really kind of turned off when they hear teachers speculate that there are more 6s than any other type, and they feel less special.
That.
Right? I get it.
I
right?
don't think, I'm like, this is the skeptic. I'm like, let me see the proof. I've seen zero evidence that there are more 6s in the world than anything else.
Total speculation. It is total. I always say that. Total speculation, when you hear that. But why do you think that 6s, and I don't know, I think it's in particular, like, I hear more 6s tell me that they're disappointed that that's their number than other types do. Why do you think that is?
I think maybe we haven't done a good job explaining sort of the nuance and texture of all the different numbers. I don't know. There's this, when you have to just sort of give bullet points.
Right.
Like the first book that I read, it said, makes a great postal worker. And I was like, what? I mean,
gosh.
And then I was kind of like, yeah, I guess I would be. So that sort of sucked, but it also hurt.
I've also heard that about 9s. I've
Yeah.
heard people say that the like 1s represent this industry or that, this number, that industry, and people say 9s post office, and I'm always like, those are stereotypes. Those are not types.
Yes. And so I've heard things like that. And then I think you and this is on me too, but there's this image of kind of this like nervous Nelly that's just like walking around in the world like, oh, I can't do this. And that's not where I live most of the time. So I just felt like that wasn't, it didn't feel true.
All right. So take me into the nuance of 6 and tell me where you live most of the time.
I think I live in the both and a lot of the time. I think I live in the both and of it takes a lot of resilience. This is what I see in the 6s that I know, to show up constantly and be afraid. So I think they're really tough. And I think they're really resilient in ways that they don't get credit for. And I think they're also very empathetic people because they know what that costs them. And so, they're not I don't feel like I'm in denial a lot of the time about pain. I'm like, I know what it is to constantly show up and be afraid and then have to do it. So when someone else tells me that, or when I'm sitting with a client in their pain, there's no part of me that just thinks I want to minimize this or I want to deny it. I'm like, yeah, I get that.
That's so funny because you as a singer-songwriter have had, terrific success. And I've seen you perform at like the Ryman Auditorium in front of thousands of people. Multiple times I've seen you perform. And there's no indication of anxiety or ambivalence about being there or nervousness. Is that because 6s mask anxiety well, or is it because you've just done it so much that in that particular milieu you don't have any lack of confidence?
I think for me, again, it's going to be frustrating. It's both. There are times that I am really nervous and no one would know because I'm really good at acting like I'm not. And then there are times that that I have shown up in my anxiety so much that it's built this confidence and resilience, and I'm not thinking about that at all. And I'm just feeling really grounded and present and in my body. And it could be either way. But I think what I've learned as a 6 is, or what I've learned over the years as I've done work, is I'm not going to let what's going on internally dictate what I do. Like, I could show up really nervous. I know how to do that. I can show up not nervous, and I can do that. Does that make sense?
Oh my gosh, yes. And you use the word resilience, which I think is so important, because one of the things that people don't understand, I think, about one of the complicated things that even the Enneagram, for example, can't account for is resilience. Resilience is something you are born with. Some people are naturally, by virtue of constitution, people who bounce back well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They just bounce back well. Some people can watch their dog be hit by a car and they bounce back in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Really. And then other people literally have to go to trauma work for a year to get over seeing the resilience between people is so different.
Yeah.
And I also wonder if that 7 wing of yours, which you mentioned to me before we started, also helps mitigate some of that anxiety.
I think it has to. I mean, I don't know that I could do my job if I didn't have a 7 wing for most of my life, honestly.
Right.
Yeah, because I do have this very playful, fun side of me. Like people on tour, you could ask them their own opinion, but I don't think they would experience me on tour as nervous or.
Right.
Usually we're like making jokes and laughing and throwing dance parties in the bus and all of that. I'm not sitting around like, oh.
But 6s that doesn't surprise me, because 6s are arguably the funniest, wittiest people on the Enneagram.
I'm thinking about that panel that we did for typology with the 6s and how hard I laughed.
Right.
Listening to Francie, Leslie, and Katie.
Right.
I like belly laughed that day.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, these are my people.
Right.
I mean, I laugh when I see them. I see Katie Williams. I saw her the other day and I just laugh because she's so funny.
She is so funny. And part of that is that the anxiety the 6s have, because it maybe, they can take it, they can then exaggerate it. They can tell a story and exaggerate the level of anxiety they were experiencing.
Yes.
Right? To the point that it's kind of absurd and hysterically funny.
Yes.
Right? And Katie does that like nobody's business.
I know she does.
Right?
She does.
Man, fantastic. So in the intervening years, since we did that panel, what have you learned about the Enneagram in now your training, and now you're a therapist, which you were, I don't even know if you were in training then, were you?
I think I was probably in school the last time I talked to you, and I've graduated since then.
So now there's so many things have happened since you've been on the show. Now you're a therapist. Now you're deeply trained in the Enneagram. What have you learned about the Enneagram in these intervening years that has been surprising, wonderful, not so great? And do you use it with clients? So there's 2 questions.
Sure. I think what I'm interested in right now is how the Enneagram connects with other things. I think your kids said it maybe on, Annie and I listened to the episode where you were interviewing your kids. It was like at Christmas time. Right. And one of them said, or maybe you said, that the longer you sit with the Enneagram, the more it just kind of gets to a deeper place. You're not like just thinking about it all the time. Right. It's just dropped down.
Right.
So I feel like it's dropped down. I don't think about it all the time. I find myself talking about it less. If a client comes in and wants to talk about the Enneagram and they're interested in that, we talk about it, but I'm always interested in finding where it connects with something else. So like in therapy, I'm interested in, wow, how does this overlap with other modalities? Right. Or how does this overlap with spiritual work? How does this overlap with, pursuer withdrawer dynamics? Or how does this overlap with this? To me, it feels like I want to see how it expands and how it relates to other things. We were talking at my boss, Stephen, was teaching the other day on how it's important to constantly kind of be changing from past, present, and future in therapy, and how you don't want to, if someone gets real myopic on one, you kind of want to zig where they zag. And I thought, oh, isn't that interesting? That's past, present, and future tense, and it sort of relates to this. And so I think I'm kind of interested in where the true things are all connecting. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think what you're describing, maybe the word I would give it is integration, right?
Integration. That's a great word for it. I'm interested in integrating it with other things that I'm learning. And
so we were today listening to a podcast, Annie and I, by Jack Kornfield, who's a Buddhist teacher. But he's a psychologist who happens to be a Buddhist, and he's a very good teacher, and I love listening to his work. And he was describing one of the personality types in Buddhism, and it's clearly a 9. It is so clearly a 9, it's crazy. And I see these kinds of overlaps in different traditions or in different things in psychology. And I'm like, well, that just kind of reassures me that it's probably true.
Right.
Right? Because it keeps showing up in different places.
Yes.
But I love it when, I can think about theology and psychology and the arts and spiritual direction. And, oh, look at that. This connects here. And if you collide this idea with that idea, it creates a new idea. And,
Totally.
And then so it's a warning to people about the Enneagram. If all you do with the Enneagram is fixate on it and not see it in the broader context of life, then you're really going to miss out on some of its depth.
Totally. And on the other hand, just try not doing that when you're at the beginning.
Right.
So in some ways, I just feel very zen about it. I'm just like, okay, it's a process. I can see people fixate on it, and it's like you just got to do it. I did it. Okay.
Right.
There's a lot of letting go to that, But, I started learning about the Enneagram in 2003.
Yeah.
So I've had a lot of time to let it sink in.
Right. And then when you do, I think it might have been me on the podcast who said that on that Christmas podcast. And the person who told me this was Richard Rohr, which was, at first the Enneagram is at the forefront of your thinking, right? You see everything is like, it's right up here.
Yep.
And then eventually it's in the back of your mind, and it activates and you access its wisdom in particular moments, and then you move on to something else. But you're not always thinking about it. And I think that's when it's most powerful. It's just in your tool belt.
Yep.
Periodically, you can turn to it and use it. And I do several times a day. And obviously, this is my job, so I probably think about it a lot more than other people do because that's my gig.
Sure.
But I think, like when I walk in a room, I don't type people.
Yeah, I don't either.
It doesn't occur to me to do that.
I don't really either. And I think I've noticed even, to me, I think what I'm more aware of now, especially if I'm sitting with someone in the room, is their energy, and maybe think about like what stance they're in. And the only
you got to explain stances to people.
Yeah, so 1s, 2s, and 6s in the dependent stance.
Meaning?
Meaning, for me, what that means is I am always thinking, what's expected of me, and how can I exceed that?
Mm-hmm.
So just feel the weight of that,
Right.
And I'm always out there. I can't go out and be with people and not be there.
Right.
That's the only way I know how to explain it.
Right.
My husband, Andy, who's a 9, can go out and be with people, and he doesn't have to be out there.
Right.
And so it just costs us something different.
Hey, Typology Tribe, I want to take a moment to thank one of our sponsors for helping us bring you what I hope is great content every week. Now, you all know, obviously, I'm a psychotherapist, and so I'm a big proponent of counseling. So, whether you feel like something is interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving certain goals, counseling is a great tool to help identify what those blocks are and then work through them. Yet, and I think probably many of you know this, finding a therapist can sometimes feel intimidating. Here comes the good news. BetterHelp offers online counseling at your own time and your own pace. You can schedule secure video or phone sessions plus text and chat with your therapist when it's convenient for you. That's huge, right? These are licensed professional counselors who specialize in things like depression, anxiety, stress, relationships, LGBT matters, trauma, and grief. BetterHelp has counselors available worldwide and have over 3,000 U.S. licensed therapists across all 50 states. And get this, if you're not satisfied with your counselor for any reason, you can request a new one at any time at no additional cost. Best of all, it's a truly affordable option. And as a special offer for Typology listeners, BetterHelp is offering 10% off your first month with the discount code Typology Podcast. So why not get started today? Go to betterhelp.com/TYPOLOGY typologpodcast. Simply fill out a questionnaire to help them assess your needs and get matched with a counselor you will love. Again, that's betterhelp.com/typology podcast, typologpodcast, betterhelp.com/typology podcast. Check them out.
I feel like.
So, and he's in the withdrawing stance.
He's in the withdrawing stance. So that's 4s, 5s, and 9s.
So talk to us about that.
Well, I mean, you could talk more about it than I could, but what he tells me and what I've experienced is he can really get what he needs from within himself. He has a very intricate interior world.
Yes.
And so when he's with people, he can still appear that he's with them, but also be kind of going back and forth, like within himself, and be pondering and thinking and
yes.
removing himself and taking care of himself. And that I don't really have that same kind of capability when I'm with people. I just feel like I'm out there.
Right.
And my face says, talk to me. And I don't know why. Yeah. Like I'll be at Kohl's checking out and someone's like, my husband just left me. And it doesn't happen to him. And people do talk to him, and he's wonderful.
And that happens to 2s a lot.
Yes.
I'm not sure with 1s, but 2s and 6s, that happens a lot, where people feel like it's going to be really safe for me to have this conversation with this person.
Yeah. And I'm just giving off this energy like I'm out here. I'm out here with you, you know? And then 3s, 7s, and 8s are in the aggressive stance or the assertive stance.
Right.
They tell me they like better, which I get. Aggressive has a negative connotation, and it's not. It's like they just move independently of other people. They're not walking in the room. They're not walking into the party like we were talking about before and thinking, oh, what are other people thinking of me and what's expected of me, or retreating in themselves or thinking, what do I need and how am I going to get there? And they're just very different energies, you know?
Although I would say with 3s, they often will walk in a room, wonder what people are thinking of them, and then adapt in order to get what they want.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, that's a good distinction.
Yeah, so it is, I think, that way of thinking about in that stance. It's like those people, they see what they want, they just go get it.
Yeah.
Me, I go inside to get what I need.
Yep.
As 5s and 9s tend to do, right? 1s, 2s, and 6s are more community-minded people, too.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And they're compliant to what the social setting expects of them. Mm-hmm. Which is why you were making that funny comment at the beginning about the common good, like I was thinking, okay, I have to speak for all 6s,
and I have to represent us well.
Yeah, right.
What pressure?
Yeah, right. And I'm anxious, right, that I'm not going to do it exactly right, So let's talk about fear for a second, or anxiety. How have you learned to manage anxiety? Because sometimes I think like 5, 6, and 7, right, are fear management, anxiety management systems, right? 2s, 3s, and 4s are shame management systems. Mm-hmm. And 8, 9, and 1 are really sort of anger management systems. So how have you learned to manage fear and anxiety in your life?
I think the really basic answer is I have just learned to show up anyway. I have learned to not let being afraid stop me.
Right.
And what's interesting in all the anxiety research that I'm reading, like to sit with clients, it's like that is the thing that we're finding is people feel like, oh, I can't do this thing if I'm afraid. My fear has to stop before I do this thing. And I think 6s they illustrate that doesn't have to be the case.
So most great therapists I know, and this is what I was trained to do. Whether people are still trained to do this now, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But we were always trained about that good therapists were non-anxious presences. Mm-hmm. Like learning to show up as a non-anxious presence for your client. How do 6s who struggle with anxiety show up as a non-anxious presence for their client?
Oh, that's a good question. What's funny is I'm not saying I don't experience anxiety in the room, because I do. But it is it is usually a good place for me to be with other people in their stuff. In some ways, it's this sense of we're not alone in this stuff. And I really work to try to just detach my stuff. And when you're focusing on someone else and their story, you're not really thinking about your own stuff. You're kind of just in the moment.
Right.
And I think that is a gift of a 6, is they're in that present. Like, I'm a present focused person. So being in the present, I don't find myself wandering a lot to like, oh, what happened before, or what, like being in the present, I think, is one of my gifts.
Yeah. And usually sixes have a little bit of ambivalence, right? Because they're both in the present and in the future at the same time.
Oh, I don't know about that. Tell me about that.
Well, because a 6 is in the present, on one level, but in the future, worried about what could happen if, right? So there's sixes oftentimes tell me that they struggle with future tripping. It's like, well, what if my husband leaves me? Or what if this happens? Or what, you know what I mean? But they also are in the present. That's part of the ambivalence of 6.
Yeah, I could see that.
Right?
That makes sense.
And so it sounds like you just tap really into, okay, right now I am just here.
Yeah.
And I'm not thinking about what I'll put that off until later, Yep. If I can just be here in this particular moment. And
and I do not do that perfectly, for sure.
Oh,
but
no,
it's like I try, really, really try to just be present.
Right. So I've done this with ones.
Okay.
Because their voice, so we all have inner voices, right? And we all have an inner critic. We were talking about this earlier before we started recording. So, ones have their version of their inner critic. The 4s, for sure, I think, have the second loudest inner critic. That's my opinion. And 6s usually have a chorus of voices in their head, all offering different opinions as to what the 6 should do, let's say about a decision, which only creates more anxiety because they don't trust their own judgment, and all these voices are speaking to them about what to do.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I've told people to do with their voices, I want to see how you respond to this, like as a practical thing for 6s, is to actually sing your fears out loud to the tune of Happy Birthday.
I'm going to have to try that.
I'm not kidding you. It works.
I have to sing Happy Birthday like 20 times.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, totally. But you can go, I'm afraid that the earth is going to fall apart and that my children are all not going to come home from school and the house is going to burn down before tomorrow. And you can just do it, right? And I'm telling you, you will just start to laugh. And
that is funny.
It evaporates. And so if you tell a 1, I should have done that earlier. Why was I late to that meeting? It's like they just start laughing at the absurdity of it all.
I'll have to try that.
Isn't that a fantastic?
I'll report back.
Do you promise?
Totally,
because
I promise.
I'm not kidding you. I think there's a whole psychological school that could be formed around singing your anxieties, your crazy inner voices.
Totally.
And because when you externalize them, you realize, oh, wait a minute, they're actually not part of me.
Yeah.
Like I'm not the problem. The problem is the problem.
Yes. I think that's something that shifted for me too, and maybe that's just through doing a lot of therapy and recovery work and spiritual direction. And the way that I see God has changed. And so I'm just so much more gentle with myself about my fear now. I'm just so much nicer to myself about it. I almost see it as like, of course you're going to be afraid. That's okay.
Yep.
You do that thing. That's all right. You've gotten through this so many times, and God's been faithful so many times, and so I just, even the posture that I extend to myself, I don't know that the fear has changed or the battle with fear has changed. My attitude towards it has changed.
We recently had Betsy Miller on the show.
I need to listen to it. I haven't listened to it, but I heard she's a 6.
Oh, and a lovely human being. And I believe on that show I told her that one of the most meaningful quotes I've read recently was in a book by Houston Smith. And in it, Houston Smith, arguably the most important expert on world religions of the 20th century, died at 93 in the last 5 years. So he taught world religions for 70 years.
Wow.
He was raised by missionary parents in China, though was no doubt a universalist, self-identified as a Christian. And in this memoir, a person asks him, so after 70 years of teaching world religion, what conclusion have you come to about God and the universe? Now that's amazing, right?
Wow.
And this 93-year-old man just quietly responds, "We're in good hands."
Oh. Wow.
I mean,
That's so good.
that like brings tears to my eyes.
Yes.
Because to me, that actually sounds like a one-sentence summation of the whole Bible.
Yeah. In my moments where it's a gift. If in moments where I can believe that, that's what gets me through. That is what gets me through.
Yes, and that's the high side of 9.
Wow.
All shall be well. All shall be well. All manner of things shall be well. It's dwelling in the peace of God, right?
Yeah.
We're in good hands.
Yeah.
And I was so moved by it. And so I know I shared that with, I'm pretty sure I shared it with Betsy. If not, this is the first time, and fantastic. But I think that's the message for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're in good hands. But I think for 6s, that should be like one of those mantras.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we're in good hands. Or I'm in good hands. Yeah, the world could be falling apart. Everything, I'm in good hands. I don't know. That has been my favorite quote of the year.
I love that. I'm going to remember that. And I know for me as a 6, I've had enough moments in my adult life where I've experienced that. And that's where that faith comes in.
Right.
Which is sort of an antidote to my anxiety or my fear. And it's always, always, always been when I didn't see something coming, which is, any terrible thing that's happened to me, I didn't see coming, right? And the things I worried about didn't happen. So something happened and I didn't see it coming. And yet God was faithful and I got me through, despite my weakness, my fear, whatever. And like the accumulation of those kind of experiences has made me a different very different person.
Right. It's good to be getting older, isn't it?
I've really liked it. I really liked it. Like even earlier before the podcast when I joked, I said the most 6-ish thing, which was one day closer to death. We're like one day closer to death. When I said it, it didn't scare me.
Right.
When I said it, I was like, yeah, further up and further in.
That's right. Thank you, Aslan, right?
Yeah, it didn't feel scary.
No, and I sometimes do look at 22-year-olds, I look at my children, 22, 25, and 28, and I love them, and they're doing fantastic. And I think to myself, oh, better you than me. I wouldn't want to be in my 20s again. That was a very messy time.
Yeah.
And being in my 50s now, I gave someone, a young person, some counsel the other day. And it wasn't all that wise. I mean, it wasn't like, and he said to me, he goes, how did you come up with that? Because he was impressed with whatever I had said. And I said, you get to my age, you just know shit.
I know. In spite of myself. In spite of myself.
Yeah, you just get to this point in your life, shit. And when you didn't know it, you were just banging into everything, and it was just hard. Now, you mentioned the word recovery, and so it triggered for me the question, are you a person who identifies as someone in recovery? And also, I'm fascinated by the overlap of the Enneagram and recovery from addictions. I just did a wonderful day-long workshop at Cumberland Heights Rehab here in Nashville. Great treatment center. And because I'm fascinated by the overlap of how can the Enneagram help people in recovery. So 2 questions, I guess. Do you self-identify as a person in recovery? And then secondly, have you thought about the overlap of the Enneagram and recovery from addictions of all kinds?
I have. I want to just say I'm a new therapist. So what I've been doing a lot, thinking about it and just being aware about it, but I've been really interested in the people that have gone before me that have done a lot of this sort of work. And so I've been reading a lot about that. And, people like Pia Melody who do work in therapeutic community, but overlapped in the recovery world. And I do identify as someone who's in recovery. What that looks like as far as the details, I don't share, but I do regularly attend a recovery program and have for years. And I just find that to be, it's just been transformative in ways that I can't even begin to describe.
So as you know, I have attended a 12-step recovery group for people wrestling with drug and alcohol addiction for years. And I oftentimes say, I wish everybody could come to these meetings.
I know. Well, and I think that when we use the language of recovery, what they talk about at the place that I work, where I'm a therapist that I love so much, is really that just we're all addicted.
Yes.
We're just all addicted, and there's a spectrum and there's a continuum to that, and it becomes really destructive at certain points. But really, none of us are wired, we're all wired to just want to medicate. Nobody wants to sit in their pain. Nobody wants to sit in their stuff. It's just the human condition.
Right.
And so if you look at it like that, you're just always looking at where am I on this continuum and what am I trying to stay asleep? Where am I trying to stay asleep and where do I need to become awake? So that's how I think of it. And when I'm sitting with my clients, there are people that obviously, would fall in the category of addict, but really it's like I'm just thinking that in a meta sense for everybody.
Yes.
What's keeping us from being awake? Where do we medicate? Where do we numb out? Where do we try to avoid our pain? And then so much grace, of course you try to avoid your pain. Pain sucks.
Right.
And if it worked for you, I would tell you to do it.
Yep.
If it worked for you to medicate, I would tell you to do it, and it's not going to work for you, and I'm sorry to tell you.
Hey everybody, one of the lessons I've learned over the years is that not everybody benefits from a traditional 50-minute counseling session. And this is why some people can go to couples therapy or personal counseling for a long time and never really get anywhere. This is why I'm such a believer of intensive counseling and my friends at Restoring the Soul in Colorado, created by my longtime friend Michael Cusick to help couples or individuals experience deep change in half-day blocks over 1 or 2 weeks. Now listen, if you can't wait months or years to get to the bottom of an issue or to experience breakthrough, you need to get in touch with my friend Michael and his extraordinary team of counselors at Restoring the Soul. If you're looking to get out of the rut you're in, but can't wait months or years, call Restoring the Soul today for a free consultation with Michael's staff. Call 303-932-9777 and learn how their intensive counseling process can help you. As a special bonus, just for Typology listeners, make sure to visit www.restoringthesoul.com/typology to download their PDF called 5 Ways Unaddressed Trauma May Be Derailing Your Relationships. So there's 2 books that I recommend every type read. The first one is a recent book surprisingly by Russell Brand.
Oh, yeah.
Recovery.
Yes, I flipped through it at the library and it looked amazing. It
is amazing because he does approach it with, even though he's a recovering heroin addict and alcoholic and food addict and sex addict. This guy's got a resume when it comes to addictions, right? But his premise is everybody's an addict everybody should be in recovery, and he explores the 12 steps through that lens.
Yeah.
Okay. The other one, of course, is one I'm sure you've read, which is Gerald May's Addiction and Grace.
I actually have not read it yet.
Oh, Jill.
But I hear the most wonderful things about it. It's on my bedside table.
Okay, so there is such a seminal work that also comes from the place of everybody's an addict.
Yeah.
So everybody also has a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
Sixes have one.
Yep.
Right? Which is projection. Mm-hmm. And obviously, defense mechanisms are their own ways of avoiding pain, right? Mm-hmm. Can you describe for people what projection is like for a six?
Man, I probably need to think about this more in depth. I think what it's like for me is, the way I would see it overlapping with therapeutic work is it looks like sometimes not knowing where I end and where others begin, which is sort of the classic definition of codependence,
Right.
And sometimes I would just assume that my stuff would be someone else's stuff, or the way that I would handle a situation is the way this person would handle a situation, or what I would think is what they're thinking.
Right.
And I can make up ridiculous stories in my head about what people are thinking. So, boundaries work and work on identity and all that kind of stuff has been really, really good for me as a six. Not picking up the rope, not picking up other people's stuff and assuming it has to be mine.
Right.
Like I get to just go, and it's hard internally. If someone's disappointed in me, as someone who's constantly asking myself what's expected of me and how can I exceed that, when people are disappointed in me, it messes me up. Or if I perceive someone is disappointed in me. So now it's like, I know that it's going to mess me up. I'm going to have the struggle internally.
Right.
But I just sit with it and I don't have to do anything about it. I don't have to respond to it. I just know, man, that person's mad because I said no to that thing. And I used to always say yes. People don't like when I have good boundaries all the time.
Yeah.
And so I have to sit with my fear and hurt and anger and sadness and loneliness that I'm not going to get rewarded for doing something that might be healthy for me.
Right.
I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. I think another piece of the shadow or of projection for as a defense mechanism for sixes, that oftentimes sixes project their own weaknesses and flaws onto other people and then punish them in the other person. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And while it gives them respite, and some measure of comfort, it also gives all their power away.
Yeah.
Because they don't then have to look at their own stuff and change.
Yeah.
They can blame someone else for being the source of the problem.
Yep. I noticed that in myself just the other day. Honestly, I'll be really vulnerable for the sake of the common good. I always have to be aware, and work has taught me this. Like when I am just sitting with someone and I sort of feel like I loathe them, because typically I really like the people that I meet, honestly and truly. Like I meet people and I just sort of assume the best things about them. And I laugh with one of my 8 friends about it because she said, you meet people and you love them. And then you have to figure out that you don't like them. She goes, I meet people and I hate them. And I have to figure out that I do like them. And we were just cracking up about that. But I was sitting with a person and I really, really had all kind of bad feelings about them going on in my head and heart and body. And that is not a typical experience for me. And so what work has taught me is like, pay attention. This is about you.
Right.
And sure enough, it just triggered a lot of things from my family of origin story. It just triggered a lot of my stuff. And it was about my own insecurities and my own stuff. I was totally putting it on this person. This person was not doing anything wrong,
right,
other than just behaving in a way that I would probably behave.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm sure I do it all the time, and I'm not even aware of it.
Yeah, and that's the six's way of defending against, in many ways, having to do their own work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like a way of, by projecting their weakness onto someone else or their shadow onto someone else, they can punish it in someone else.
Yep.
And which in a way is a little bit like a sexual 4 will do that too, Yeah,
that makes sense.
So, all right. So here's a question for you.
Okay.
All right. So we live in this anxious age, and we are now into an election cycle.
Yeah.
Okay. And we had a couple of years, all right, so it's been 3 years, since we had our last one started up, and now the Iowa caucuses just happened, and blah, 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 blah. And I know that for 6s, we always laugh, right? For 8s, this is the happiest time of their lives, right? Because they get to argue with everybody about everything. You know what I mean?
Oh, I don't know. My 8 friends are not happy. They're losing their minds.
Right. Well, but there's a kind of energy that they get from the losing of the mind. You know what I'm saying? But for 6s who have issues around authority figures, and also anxiety, which is everywhere because it's like the zeitgeist, it's in the air, it's everywhere. It's like we're all being manipulated by anxiety and fear. So can you tell me how you're experiencing that, and how and maybe including some thoughts about your relationship with authority figures, because that's a big deal for 6s. And then how are you coping? How should 6s cope as we head into this year leading up to another election filled with anxiety?
That's such a good question. I'm not even sure where to start. But what I will tell you, I'm going to throw out this theory, and y'all can tell me if you experience this to be true over time and as more 6s come on the show. But when we were talking about the way 6s get categorized versus the way that I really experience my internal world, I think sometimes fear gets put at the feet of 6s. Like if there's a lot of fear in the world, it must be the 6s. If there's a lot of fear in the world, it must be there are more 6s in the world than anybody else. And I think in the same way that a 4 can go into sad, in a way that it doesn't scare them because they're used to sitting with it, that's how I experience this as a 6. I'm just kind of like, oh, now everybody's afraid? Oh, okay. Oh, good. I thought I was alone here. It doesn't feel like, to me, the people who aren't used to sitting in fear are the ones who seem to be having a harder time.
Right.
And so I'm not saying that people's division is not hard for me. It is hard for me.
Well,
but it's always been hard
person.
for me. And it was hard for me in 2012, and it was hard for me in 2000, and it was hard for me, So
that's interesting, by the way, about division.
Yeah.
Because that would be a very hard feeling for a 6 to have to feel.
Oh, it kills me. It really, really kills me.
Because you're so community-minded. You're so, like a 9, you're very inclusive. You care very much about everybody being included.
Yep.
You care about the community being together.
Totally.
So, we're so fractured.
Yeah.
How hard it must be for 6s. It's hard for everybody, but for 6s.
Yeah.
And you're observing us now going, well, welcome to my life.
Yeah.
Right?
I feel like it feels like I'm constantly in a state where my parents are getting divorced. That's what it feels like. I just feel like, I was thinking that the other day because I used to love to listen to the radio. I used to love to listen like NPR when I was cooking. It was like it was like a liturgy for me. I would cook, and my kids are coming home and listen to the radio. And now it just feels like, I just feel like I'm in a state of prolonged divorce. And it's not because I don't have my personal opinions, because I do. And I'm really fiery about them. It's not like I'm like, oh, it's not a big deal. Can't we all just get along? It's not that.
Right.
It's just this sense of like, there's just this lack of reason, and there's this lack of empathy, and there's this lack of awareness of other people and their feelings, and surely a lack of common good. And that drives me bonkers.
Right.
And I feel, I have to turn the radio off. And I used to love knowing what was going on. I used to love it.
I know. I tell sixes all the time now, do not have a television playing in the background.
I talk out loud to it a lot, honestly. That's what happens. You can ask my kids, or if Andy calls it OT Jill. I can't remember if I told you this before on the podcast. It's Old Testament Jill. And he's like, you are the nicest person in the world until you're not. And it comes out on the plane when people are trying to like deplane before it's their turn. I get so mad. I'm just like, and it's not about systems. I don't give two figs about systems. It's like, how can you not think about the person sitting in front of you that they might want to get off? Like, what is your deal? You know, what is it like to just live thinking about yourself? It just makes me so angry. And so that's what I feel like when I'm watching the TV. I'll just start yelling at it or like talking back to it like, this is crazy. You know, and my kids are like, oh my gosh, Mom, just like, what is happening?
That is awesome.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it's interesting when you're about the plane, I was thinking about how important these unconscious motivations are, because one would have the same reaction, but for an entirely different reason.
Yeah, I don't care about systems.
Or being appropriate.
I mean, I guess I do care about being appropriate as a six, but like, it's really about how could you live in such a way that you don't think about other people?
The common good.
How could you?
Right.
I don't even know what that would be like.
Yep.
I can't even imagine.
Man. What's next for you?
I'm going to make a record this year. I've been writing. I kind of put that on hold while I was in grad school. It was just too hard to do it all. And in some ways, it was nice to just kind of let the fields rest and just see what was going to come up. And so the stuff I've been writing now, I really like, and I'm really enjoying that. So I think I'm going to do an album this year. Still doing some shows and doing music and talk about integration. I really like doing a lot of different things. That's what I've learned about myself.
Yeah, I call it a portfolio life.
I like it.
Me
and
too.
I was surprised. And I think people don't know what to do with that because they're like, oh, you went to grad school and you're seeing clients part-time. That must mean you're not going to do music. And I'm like, no, I'm totally going to do music. To me, I find that it's like generative. The creativity is generative. So the more I do this thing and love this thing, the more this grows. And so I'm I'm loving teaching and I'm loving leading retreats. And I've been doing speaking at retreats, which I never thought I would be a speaker in 1 million years. I'm learning I really like it. Like, that's interesting. So I'm feeling like there's all this new that's coming in the second half of life and all this leaning into risk and taking chances and all the things that as a six are really good for me to do. And it has been so rewarding. I feel the most fulfilled in my life and work than I have in a really long time.
Well, hooray for that.
Yeah.
Hooray for that. And no one I know more deserves to feel that way in the world than you.
Thanks, Ian. That's so nice.
Yeah. And as always, it's cool to spend time with you. I've had a wonderful week. I had breakfast with your husband, Andy, yesterday.
He loved it.
Today, I get you on my podcast. Who knows? Maybe I'll see your kids over the weekend. Who knows?
Yes.
I may get the whole family in.
Adi would love to see Percy, who she worships.
My dog, Percy.
Yes. Come and we'll have a dance party in the kitchen.
All right. And Percy would be happy to dance.
Yeah.
Will you come back again?
I'd love it.
Oh, man. So would we. Typology listeners, please remember the words of the great Oscar Wilde. Be yourself. Everybody else is already taken.